Welcome into this Five Clubs conversation. I'm Gary Williams. The author who's going to join us is somebody who's been as prolific and as accomplished as anybody in the last 40 years. His first book was A Season on the Brink, taking you inside a season at Indiana basketball under Bob Knight. And since then, he has written so many books about all sports: tennis, golf, baseball, football. One of his most recent ones was the story of the 1968 Olympics and the protest that was made. And the title of the book is Raise a Fist, Take a Knee. All the way in between, he's giving you the inside story on individuals and events and stories. The person I'm talking about is John Feinstein. Now, his most recent book is about somebody I used to work with. Not a lot, but we worked for the same company. He's one of the biggest stars that golf has ever had when it came to televised golf. It's David Feherty. The book is Feherty, about his life, his challenges, and what's now, including LIV Golf, where he is kind of the face on the TV side of that property. This conversation, John Feinstein, David Feherty, now.
I think this is only a grip.
It's only my sole connection to this.
It's only in my hands on every single shot.
It's an extra 2 yards of carry when it matters most.
Yeah, only a grip.
Mine are only golf pride.
Respect the grip.
And with that, we welcome in the author, John Feinstein, and the subject, which is probably a good name for him, the subject, David Feherty.
Or the victim.
Good morning to both of you. How are you?
Or is that the object?
Yes,
Good,
the object.
good,
That's not
thanks,
bad.
Harry.
Good morning.
David, let me start with you. Look, you've been pretty damn forthright throughout your career about life beyond just talking into a microphone. When John approached you, and I assume that was how this went, did you say, yeah, I want to do this right away?
John would probably answer that better than me. I'm not sure that because it's not the first time that we've spoken about it. I think I was reluctant, to be honest with you.
Yeah, that's accurate, Gary. David and I had actually talked about the possibility of someday doing a book for a couple of years, right, David? And
yeah,
we were at dinner at the Honda Classic, and I think I said something along the lines of, "Are you any closer to being willing to do a book that would honestly cover your life?" And he said, yeah, I am ready. I think it's time. David, you can speak to this, but people had been asking him or saying to him for years he should do a book on his life because it's been such a remarkable life, for both good and bad. And he said something to me. I don't know if you remember this, David, but it was incredibly flattering to me. He said, "You're the only one I would trust to do it." And at that point, we started working toward doing it.
David.
Yeah, I recall that now.
It's interesting. John mentions early in the book about this first interlude. He's at PGA Tour orientation. You'd gone through Q school. You're already a very accomplished player. You'd been on a Ryder Cup team. And he heard you respond to basically a media consultant who is basically telling you how to say nothing in a word salad. If, here's what you do, and it'll never get you in trouble. And your response was, is there something wrong with just telling the truth? And John thought to himself, you know what? I know I like this guy already. I set that up by asking you this. Telling all the truths in this book, was it hard at all?
Yeah, it was. Not so much because I didn't want them out in the open, but that, you know, some of them are just difficult to remember. Not in a sense that, you know, I can't remember them, but they're kind of painful, you know.
Yeah, I think that's true, Gary. Obviously, but I will say this: that David never backed away from any of the more difficult subjects we covered. He never once said, "I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to go there." He did his very best to answer the questions, and there were times when he would say to me, "You should talk to Anita about that. You should talk to my children about that." And I did, and they were remarkably helpful and cooperative, and allowed me to sort of round out the stories where David's memory either was not perfect or where, as he said, it was painful to talk about.
David, pain is, you know, people who followed your career, you've given so much joy to so many people who like golf, and you presented it in a way that was just, there was this, you know, it was happy, it was fun, there was levity, it was frivolous. It's just golf, that's all it was. But there is a lot of pain that's part of your life's journey. Did sharing the pain in any way ease the pain?
Yeah, you know, with my foundation, you know, I've got a foundation for wounded military. We have found that, you know, any time that you can talk about a traumatic event, you know, each time that you do, your memory stores it in a slightly different way. You know, if you face up to it and lean into it, you know, the next time you talk about it, you know, it won't be so bad. So, yeah, I mean, I found the same thing in my life, you know, like the death of my son, which you know, I still don't like to talk about, but it's one of those things that each time I do talk about him, you know, I remember him in a slightly fonder or you know, a slightly better way, I think.
John, you know, one of the things about this book is also talking about addiction and disease. And
right.
Addiction and disease has touched your life. What did you learn, if anything, about addiction and the disease of alcoholism that maybe you didn't already know?
Well, as you said, I did know a good bit about it, Gary, because my mom was an alcoholic. But I learned from David that the ways we think of, okay, go to AA meetings and that'll fix it, or go away and that'll fix it. There's no one way to fix addiction. It's different for everybody. It's more difficult for some than others. I think David would attest to that. And you can't be judgmental of people who have an addiction, because that's what it is. I mean, I laugh when I read where, you know, laugh kind of sadly when I read where someone admitted to being an alcoholic. You know, to me, that's not an admission. That's like saying you admitted to having cancer or any other disease. It's a disease and should be treated. I was able to treat it empathetically because of my mom. Others should treat it sympathetically. It's that simple to me.
I've talked about my own alcoholism here and other places. And David, I've never shared this anecdote. Before I went away, John talked about going away. I've done that. I've gone away. Before I did, my mom, who has also been touched by alcoholism, not only because her son is an alcoholic, but others, she said to me, Gary, you have to understand something. You've effectively stood in the middle of your family and pulled the pin on a hand grenade. There's collateral damage all around you. And she wasn't doing that to hurt me. She was doing that for me to understand that there is a lot of repairing that's going to have to be done beyond the repairing I'm going to try to do for myself. Is that something that you're very aware of?
You know, for me, the whole going away, if you know, that's the way you want to put it, it was,
I was being kind, David.
It nearly ended my life. It was a horrifying experience for me, rehab. And, you know, I always, you know, think when I hear someone's a recovering alcoholic, you know, there's no recovery. Yeah, addicts know that. You know, I'm not a recovering alcoholic. I'm just not drunk. It's not something that you recover from. Once an addict, always an addict. And you know, I came to terms with that relatively early in the discovery of my disease. But you know, going to meetings or being in rehab, everyone's different. You know, I can see how that would work, you know, for some people. But I resented the fact, you know, that I had to go to rehab. I never got to the place where, you know, because they strip everything away from you, you know, they make your world so small. I couldn't deal with it. You know, they took my shoelaces. I spent the first, you know, 2.5 days in the psychiatric ward where, you know, I was attached to a table at one stage. There was a psychiatrist, a trainee, because they use you as guinea pigs as well up at the Mayo. There was a trainee psychologist. This kid couldn't have been more than 25 years old, who told me that, you know, my medicine, my psych meds, you know, should be a reward for not drinking. Well, it was, I went for his throat. You know, it's something that still, you know, for me that's a really painful memory.
You know, John, and that's in the book. I mean, that, you know, detailing David's, you know, aversion to group therapy and being around other people in these small groups and the whole rehab experience. Like he said, that's not hyperbole. He went there and he was literally at wit's end. He couldn't function. You know, when you're learning about this, did you have any awareness to that part of those various chapters of his life?
No, I had known that David had gone to rehab. And we had talked about it because, as I said, my mom went to rehab. David lasted, what was it, 12 days, David, I believe, before he left. And that was one of the things I was talking about, was saying that no one way is the right answer for an addict. David, Tom Watson helped get David to an AA group that helped. And then bicycling became AA meeting, and now shooting is his AA meeting. And the point that David made is true. You never stop being an addict. You know, I mean, I'll be honest. I know my mother was an addict, and I've never been addicted to alcohol, but I am addicted to food, and David can certainly testify to that. And I don't say that as a joke. I mean, I have trouble.
That's the hardest.
Go ahead.
No, that's the hardest of all the addictions to kick, because you have to eat. You know, I mean, if I had to drink a little every meal, have to eat, and food addiction is the very
right.
It's harder than heroin. It's harder than
dangerous in different ways.
It's harder than any of those things, you know, to kick.
Right. And so the point being that David is correct, that if you're an addict, you're an addict, and you just have to find different ways to deal with it. David has found different ways to deal with it in the last few years, and I think having a great marriage has also helped him deal with it. Because if you're happier, you're less likely to drink, or you're less likely to overeat, whatever it might be.
There's no doubt. I mean, I couldn't do it alone. Not a chance. I mean, I've had incredible support, starting with my wife and with people around me. You mentioned Tom Watson, John, and I remember the episode of Feherty when you're sitting in that barn and you're reliving, you know, that moment in your life when he looked at you and he said, "You're not well." What I didn't know, and when John and I were putting this together, I asked him, I said, "Did you know Nicholas's role in this?" And he said, "I didn't know it until he told me." And the role that Jack played was that Tom was ready, David, to tell you that you needed help. But he was more than ready, because he knew, like other alcoholics and addicts, you'll repel against the idea. And he said, no, don't tell me you can't get there. We're going to get you there. We're going to get you there on air bear, because Jack's right here and he's going to give you the plane. I want you to share with people just your memories of that episode in your life when someone put out his hand and said, I'm going to walk with you. I've been down this road myself. And then this other guy who's not, but he's here to help you as well.
Yeah, it was at Prince Edward Island. It was a made-for-television thing for Canadian TV, Jack Nicklaus versus Tom Watson. And to make the story short, I was interviewing both Jack and Tom upstairs in the clubhouse. I'd already interviewed Jack, and it was in the middle, at the start of interviewing Tom when he stopped me. And I was in just a god-awful place, drinking a bottle and a half of Bushmills a day, taking whatever pills I could, and, cocaine was in my life at that stage as well. I was just, in the worst possible spot. I couldn't wait to get back to my room, to the bar, and I said, no, I'm not. And he said, I said, how do you know? And he looked at me and he says, I can see it in your eyes. And I said, well, what do you see? And he said, I see my reflection. And I didn't know at the time that Tom was an alcoholic. And he said, you need to come with me. I said, to where? He said, to Kansas City, to my meeting. And right now I'm trying to backpedal. I said, well, hey, we need 2 kayaks and a float plane to get to Toronto. How are we going to get to Kansas City? And I hear from behind me, I have a G5. So I'm being harassed by Tom Watson and kidnapped by Jack Nicklaus.
You actually said bullied by Tom Watson to me and kidnapped by Jack Nicklaus.
Yeah.
And John, look, your relationship with Tom, you wrote a fabulous book about, his relationship with his late caddy, Bruce Edwards. You've devoted a lot of time and energy to raise money for the fight against ALS. Do you remember watching that episode of Feherty?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I was a regular watcher of Feherty.
Yes, as was I.
As was anybody. Well, you didn't even have to care about golf.
No.
It was a very good show, regardless of golf or not. But yes, I remember watching it. I remember David sitting on a horse and looking very uncomfortable. Yeah. Let's put it that way. But yeah, and the only thing was that I knew that David was an alcoholic. I knew Tom was an alcoholic. So there were no shocking revelations to me, but I think most people watching that probably watched with their mouths open at the honesty of both men about their addictions and about their lives. It was a remarkable interview, and really, if you think back on Feherty, David was a great interviewer, and I hope the show comes back. I know there's hope for it because it was so damn good. And Golf Channel canceling it, of all the many dumb things Golf Channel has done, that may be the dumbest.
John Feinstein, David Feherty with me. The book is Feherty, The Remarkably Funny and Tragic Journey of Golf's David Feherty. David, it's interesting, during the course of this book, John mentioned the closing of this one chapter, and it was significant. The period of your life when you made the decision, and it's chronicled in the book, going from CBS to NBC, it was, the entry point was through Feherty, because the language in your contract with CBS permitted you to do this type of show. I, as somebody who was hosting a show at Golf Channel at the time, was like, holy shit, we've got this guy now? And having you come in studio, and it was such a joy. But then it was also the ending of that period of your life. When you talked about leaving NBC and going on to LIV Golf, did you learn anything about the decision you made by simply talking to John about all of this?
Yeah, I think so. Life is about timing, and for me, I felt like I'd reached, I'd done everything that I wanted to do at CBS, and the opportunity to be with NBC and be with a different crew and do something different, and also have that relationship with the Golf Channel was it was phenomenal, and I have no regrets about my time with CBS or NBC, but it was a good move for me again, from NBC to LIV, because I felt like I was at the end of my career, and I wasn't sure if I was going to be rehired or any of that, because at the end of the CBS run, they got rid of McCord and Costas. And at the end of the NBC run, they got rid of Gary Koch and Roger Maltby. So I mean, I could have been the third part of that equation in either of those two instances. So the opportunity to be a lead analyst at LIV and to have another 5 years at least, it was just a phenomenal opportunity for me.
John, one of the things that you capture in the book is talking about how it all started, and for a lot of people, it's great. It's great to learn about, it was accidental. It's the International. It's a great event out in Denver, and they always dealt with lightning and weather delays. So there was a delay after what I believe it was in the first round. Right. McCord walks into the locker room, and David is doing what he's apt to do expertly and extemporaneously. He's holding court. And McCord's like, Jesus, this guy's hilarious. I know we're going to have weather tomorrow. Maybe I'll bring him up in the tower, where guys used to actually go out in towers on hole assignments. Did you know any of that stuff before all that was shared?
No, I knew that Gary had played an important role in bringing David to TV and to CBS, but I didn't know that specific story until he told me that. By the way, just sidebar, Jim Nantz told me that before the International every year in their production meetings, they would discuss how they were going to deal with the lightning delays because they were inevitable. But Gary was, like you said, was in the locker room. It was during a rain delay. David was just sitting around telling stories the way really only David can. And Gary, you guys had never met, right, David? Gary had never met you. David was struggling at that point as a golfer with injuries, with his drinking, with the end of his first marriage, which was a disaster, as we know. And Gary walked up to him and introduced himself and said what you just said, Gary, it's going to be a long day tomorrow. Why don't you come and sit with me in the tower for a couple hours? And David eventually figured, I got nothing to lose, and showed up. And he walked into the tower just in time to hear Gary telling Frank Chirkinian, the Ayatollah of CBS Golf, that he'd invited David to come up. And he said, what are you talking about? I don't want that crazy guy in my booth. But Frank, to his credit,
the term he used was, I don't want that Irish prick in my booth.
I don't know why he thought you were a prick.
Yeah, I don't either. That doesn't apply.
Maybe, but not a prick.
Yeah.
But
that was just Frank.
Yeah, that was Frank. I sat in the
production truck, yeah,
on a number of occasions, and it was more entertaining than watching the telecast by a lot. But he relented, and as they were walking down the steps afterwards, Gary said to David, this is what you're going to do next, and I hope you'll keep CBS in mind. And the way that came about was, of course, Ben Wright had to leave CBS because of his comments about women players. And they were looking for a replacement for Ben Wright. And David was sitting at a bar in Akron during the World Series of Golf. And as he described it, because he was still an athlete, he was drinking Gatorade with his vodka. And Lance Barrow and Rick Gentile walked up to him and said, we're from CBS. Can we talk to you for a moment? And David's first thought was, oh, God, CBS is doing a 60 Minutes piece on alcoholic athletes, and that's why they want to talk to me. Fortunately, they wanted to talk to him about a job.
First of all, you're not the only one who did the Gatorade and the vodka thing. You're not original. I can promise you that. Hand raised. But that meeting in the Akron Hotel bar, David, to me was pretty damn significant, because you admitted to them that, yeah, drinking's an issue, and you told them, I'll never drink on the air. And you never did, which is a damn miracle.
Yeah. Well, the thing that it was actually Jack Graham at ABC that gave me my my first gig on TV, because in between the incident at the International with McCord and me signing with CBS, I went to trial and I worked with Ben Wright and Wayne Riley and a few others. Jack Graham was the producer of I can't remember, it was a Johnny Walker event, was it?
Yeah, Johnny Walker.
Something like that.
Right.
In trial in Jamaica. And then, I'd qualified for the World Series of Golf. I'd won a tournament in some communist country. I can't remember where it was. And
United States.
That's when the CBS, maybe. No, I never won in the United States. But it was a significant meeting, that's for sure. And I mean, I told them that I had a problem, and Lance Barrow looked at me, God bless him, and he said, "Hey, we have Pat Summerall and Ben Wright, and they were used to dealing with people who had this particular problem, shall we say?" And Kenny, Kenny.
That group, David. I mean, obviously people know about Pat Summerall's, troubles and challenges. And then eventually he had to stop drinking. He was going to die otherwise. But that group, I mean, historically speaking, I think of the ABC crew from the 80s into the early 90s. I mean, that was like the 27 Yankees lineup. But that CBS crew that you joined with the young Nance and with obviously Summerall, with Venturi, McCord becoming what he did, was that intimidating in any way? Or were you just like, I got nothing to lose here?
No, it was intimidating. These guys were, I felt, the best at what they did. They described golf in a different way. And for me to fit into it and be myself it was an intimidating thought. But they made it easy for me. Lance Barrow made it easy for me, I kind of slipped into the role almost immediately that Ben had filled with Gary. Because we got along so well and had similar outlooks on life. I think
just to add to that, Gary, two guys were key for David, in my opinion. One was, as he said, Lance Barrow, because Lance was the one who made the decision to put him on the ground and not put him in a tower and have him walk with the last group. And David was unique in the way he dealt with that, because the players liked him. Even Tiger Woods liked him. And the other guy was Gary, because he was able to draw out David's humor with his own humor. And the two of them are still close friends. And I think people recognized right away that what they were seeing was like nothing you had ever seen in TV golf when David joined the CBS crew.
No, it's absolutely true. John, you mentioned David's interviewing ability. And it's one thing to do 3 minutes in a post-round interview and ask somebody a couple thoughts about, the key moments in a round. It's another thing to sit down with these interview subjects for what turns into an hour show, but was way beyond that. The editing gets it to 60 minutes and so on and so forth. But I want you to explain to me your theory on why he's such a good interviewer. I have my own, and this is somebody who admittedly has attention issues and has had them his whole life, and is part of, the challenge with shame and feeling the way that he felt as a kid. Why do you think he's such a good interviewer? Well,
first of all, he's very smart, and if you're smart, you know how to follow up during an interview. A lot of times, I'm sure you've experienced this, David, you probably have too. People will say, can you send me a list of questions before you interview somebody?
Yep.
My answer always is no, because I don't know what my second question is going to be until I hear the answer to the first question. But also, I have a son who's ADD, so I'm familiar with it. And ADD people tend to be, as I said, very smart. But when they want to focus, when they really are interested in something, they can what's called hyper-focus. Mike Krzyzewski, the Duke basketball coach, hyper-focus when he was watching tape. The rest of the time, he couldn't focus at all. He told me he's never read a book from beginning to end. And ADD affects different people differently. But the other thing was two other things. One, the interviewees trusted and liked David. I mean, Bill Clinton asked to be on the show, a former president. And so did many others. And the other thing was, as I said, David never came in with this list of questions and he was going to ask them in order no matter what. He would listen to the answer and then follow up based on the answer. So I think, in a sense, being unscripted, but coming in very prepared in terms of the person's background, who he was, what you wanted to ask him, that combination made for very good interviewing, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, I agree with that. What I would add to that, David, is this, and I think it's because it's who you are. Listening is a very unselfish action. You don't have to. And one of the things that I was struck by when I was around Rory McIlroy for the first time, I remember coming back to Golf Channel. He was 21, and you've known him, basically his whole life. And I said to people, he's a good listener, which surprised me. One, because he's an athlete and he's been put in this position, but also he's an only child. And I said, that's unselfish. He doesn't have to listen to me. And my dad used to say to me, hearing is a sense, Gary, listening is a skill. A skill is only refined if you want to impart, the time and effort to do that. You're unselfish. That's the way you are. So did doing the long form interviews seem to be not easy, but something that you were attracted to because it was natural?
Yeah, well, John put it fairly well in that, the attention deficit side of me is, the ADD. I was interested in my subjects. I got to pick, for the most part, I got to pick the people that I wanted to interview. Some people wanted to be interviewed the other way around, but I was always interested in my subject, and that's why, the focus was there. I wasn't so scatterbrained. And the other thing was I had fantastic people that worked for me. David Haas, you'll know a bunch of them. Keith Allo, Dean Butler, Jay Kossoff, James Ponte. I had fantastic researchers and people that worked behind the scenes on that show that made it so much easier for me, to ask questions and to be able to have the luxury of being able to listen, the way that I did.
John, when David made the decision to go over to LIV, and you didn't know this was going to happen, and you're in the middle of this. I've never asked you your thoughts about LIV.
Well, let me say first, I wasn't in the middle of it. I was just about at the end.
Right.
When it happened, and I texted David, and I said, you mean to tell me I have to rewrite the last 2 chapters of this book so you could make a couple million measly extra dollars? And he texted back and said, it's not a couple million measly extra dollars. And by the way, good for him. And what my feelings on LIV are, first of all, it's very easy to sit back and say, oh, I never would have taken that money because of who it came from. But the kind of money that was being offered, as Harold Varner III said very eloquently, this is generational money. David did not know what his future was with NBC. He had 1 year left on his contract. They had taken away the Golf Channel show. And here comes Greg Norman saying, I want you to be our John Madden. Hard for me to sit back here and say, well, I never would have done that because I don't know what I would have done. There's a pretty good chance I would have said, okay, I'll take the money. And I'm glad for David because he loves the telecasts and they're going to grow over time, inevitably. I think eventually there has to be some kind of merger. that allows the best players to play against one another the way they should. But overall, I am happy for David because David is happy. And David's my friend. And I want him to be happy. It did create more work for me, I have to admit. But it's part of the story. So obviously we had to include it, and we did. David,
it's in the book about how Greg Norman called your wife. You knew why he was calling. This wasn't, hey, how you doing? We haven't chatted for a while. You knew the nature of the call. And you know, it seems to me in the way that it was presented by John in the writing is that if the number was right, it was going to be right. Is that fair?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And even if the number hadn't been that right, you know, this was something that I wanted to do, Gary. I mean, I've known Greg for so many years, and I know that he has tried to do this, you know, since the 90s. He has wanted to, you know, make the game more global. And when was it, John?
1994.
Yeah.
Yeah, that he tried for that World
94. Yes. Yeah. You know, I mean, the best part of 30 years, you know, Greg had been trying to do this, you know, and he'd been a great friend. And, you know, just to think of me, you know, to have that sort of faith in me, you know, absolutely. I was going to say yes, you know, for whatever.
One of the things that John captures in the book, which I didn't know this, my intuition told me that not that it was an unhappy experience to do this annually, was that like when you were at CBS, the Masters Week, it was like there's such restraint associated with that exercise, no matter who it is, but in particular you. And then beyond that, like you being liberated, like I felt like Feherty, the show, that was you. And that more and more, John, of golf broadcast television had become a lot less of that, and that he couldn't be him. That's the way I felt the last, 5-6 years, to be honest.
Well, I don't think that anybody is actually him during a Masters telecast. I remember the 8 pages of instructions that we used to get when I worked for Golf Channel. And the irony, though, is that David never felt completely comfortable at Augusta. Part of it was that he had to work out of a tower when he was used to working on the ground. Nobody's allowed to work on the ground at the Masters. But interestingly, both Lance Barrow, who was David's executive producer at CBS, and Tommy Roy, who was his producer at NBC, thought he was great at the Masters because he was able to find a balance between playing by all the Augusta rules and being David. He was still more David than anybody else, even though he wasn't completely David. And I found it interesting that even though he was never completely comfortable there, people liked what he did at Augusta. He didn't like what he did at Augusta.
I just wrote this down. I'm not sure if it was you, David, describing it to John, or John, the way that you transcribed it. This, to me, is an expert explanation of the difference between Lance Barrow, the longtime producer at CBS, and Tommy Roy. And it reads, Lance was a TV guy who was very good at doing golf. Tommy was a golf guy who was very good at doing TV. David, were those your words? I'm pretty sure it was, right?
They were David's words, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's too smart for me to say.
Well, I as somebody who I didn't work directly with either one of them, was around both of them a fair amount. I've never heard anybody describe it better than that. That's the perfect description, and that's why I said it had to be from David, because it's too smart for me to say. I'm not that smart. David, now with the broadcast of look, all these guys, balls are in the air at all times on a PGA Tour event, but this literally is, everybody's teeing off at the same time. It's one less round. Do you feel somewhat liberated? Do you feel like you are reclaiming maybe things that not that you lost, but were not necessarily as permissible now in doing what you're doing?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I can be myself a bit more. On the telecast, there's a looser sort of a structure to the, and it's just been a liberating experience for me. The fact that I'm lead analyst, that I can, have a little more say in what actually goes on of my own, aspect, towards the show as well.
John, David said this earlier, but I have to just touch on it because it's important. It's talked about in detail, and that is the death of David's son. And in writing about the subjects that you've written about for decades and decades, there's difficult stuff that you've had to deal with. The loss of a child is so profound, it's unimaginable to those of us who've not had that experience. Talking about it, listening to him, listening to others, what was the thing that stands out most?
Well, Gary, unimaginable is the word for anybody. The hardest book I'd ever written prior to the sections about Shay in this book was Caddy for Life, because I was watching a friend, also a friend of David's, Bruce Edwards, die while I was writing and reporting the book. But that's nothing compared to losing a child. And I think it was not only brave of David to talk about it to me, but also very brave of his family members, Anita, his wife, and his two children, Rory and Aaron. They were very honest about it and honest about how it affected David. They pulled no punches. Rory was kind enough to send me a copy of the eulogy he gave for his brother, which is heartbreaking to read. And David, I don't honestly know how much you remember about it because you were in, as everybody said, such a frozen state at that point. But it was a wonderful eulogy.
Yeah.
I felt through the four of them, I got to know Shay a little bit. And as I said, I'm grateful to all of them for that. I'm starting to get choked up. I'm sorry. Because of their courage in dealing with the subject and being willing to deal with the subject with me, especially the children, because they didn't know me at all. David at least knew me. Anita knew me a little bit, but they were all very open and willing on, like you said, the most difficult subject that can occur in a lifetime.
David, he succumbed to something that you live with, as we talked about earlier. The idea of recovering, it's a disease that can be treated. It can't be cured. It's right around the corner. You know it. I know it. Is there anything about knowing that brings any comfort at all to you, or just solace in any way, knowing that the disease is so hideous and so relentless? You can be fine for 10 years, and vulnerability is a blink of an eye away.
Yeah. Well, I was fine for 10 years, and it's just, something like this is such a gut punch. And, dealing with depression, which, I've had for most of my life. People ask me, what's the difference between that and sadness? Depression is sadness minus hope. And that was the hardest part, for me, just, the thought of him having no hope, to where he had to deal with his life with drugs to the extent that he did.
And for you yourself, John mentioned it earlier, look, everybody's different how they treat whatever it is that they've got. And some people are good doing it in a therapeutic way, and some people respond to AA. With you have gone, head first into different things. And if people read this and they go, gosh, really, is he really, he's going to a shooting range, and obviously he's being very responsible, but that is his way of dealing with it. Is that the only way for you?
Shooting for me is kind of therapeutic. It's long distance shooting. I build the rifles myself. I make the ammunition, and I give the rifles to wounded service members after having shot them myself. To make sure that they're all right. So it's kind of I get down there by myself, and we have a private range that's out to a mile, and it's something that interests me. So I have that hyper focus. And that kind of mentality where, it's something that I'm good at. It absorbs me. I find it compelling. The whole, just the whole, everything about the sport, it absorbs me, the way that golf used to.
John, when you go ahead.
Let me add, Gary, the way that bicycling used to, until David was in several accidents that made him incapable of biking miles a day that he used to bike.
David mentioned something earlier, John, about how he mentioned about when he was the whole episode with Watson and Nicholas, and how his inclination, and it's the inclination of somebody who's in the throes of addiction, they're in pursuit of isolation. That just get me back to my room is what he said, and I can promise you, I've never shared this before, and when I relapsed a couple years ago, one of the last people I saw, he won't remember this, I was walking into a hotel room in White Plains at the U.S. Open, and who was walking out of the elevator was David Feherty. And instead of engaging him and talking to him, I was already gone. I hadn't had anything to drink, but my relapse had already begun because I had allowed my recovery to become dysfunctional. And I say that as a prelude. Do you worry about him? And he's obviously sitting right here so he can hear this, but I'm asking you as somebody who spent so much time with him.
Well, the honest answer is yes. And I'm not the only one by any stretch. And David describes his day-to-day life as being a white-knuckle ride to stay sober. And again, having watched my mom deal with it, having had other friends like you who've dealt with it, of course I worry about him because he is my friend, because I do care about him, and because I know, because he's told me, that every day is a challenge for him. And that every day, part of his day is sadness, in large part because of Shay. Because let's be honest, you don't ever completely recover from that sort of thing. And I remember I was lucky enough to interview Bill Clinton for this book, and he said to me that he was one of the first people to call David after Shay's death. And
he was.
Yeah, and he said they talked a long time, and he kept trying to say to David, look, you don't blame yourself for this. Don't put this on yourself. And he said, but I'm a father too, and I knew and I know that there's no way he's ever going to stop blaming himself because he's a father. And so, yes, I do worry about David. I love getting the chance to see him. But yes, absolutely. Anybody who knows David and cares about David worries about him.
David, there's nothing that John just said that I would push back on at all. The only thing I would add is that you know how devious and relentless the disease is. So nobody can keep you sober, just like nobody could keep him. It is a singular pursuit that you need unwavering support, obviously. You try to remind yourself of that, don't you?
Yeah, I do. And, to be honest, I'm not a recovering alcoholic, Gary. I'm a dry drunk. And there's a big difference there. And every day for me is difficult in those terms, and I don't have perfect attendance. It's a continuous struggle, and I wish, that I could be a recovering alcoholic, but it's just in my nature for some reason.
Well, I can tell you, for anybody who just heard that and they're going, what's the difference? That admission and that honesty is so damn, it's powerful as hell to hear you.
Too.
Very important, vitally, critically important to know the distinction, and the admission is extraordinary. John, when you write books, I don't know how you feel at the end of all of them. There's got to be different emotions. And I wrote down a bunch that maybe you felt all of them. But when you finished this project, did you feel happy, sad, concerned, inspired? What were the things that you felt most?
I think those are all good words to use. I was happy that we had gotten through the process and that I was able to write the book. I hope I did a good job. I always, in a case where I'm writing about either one individual or a small group of individuals, I hope my storytelling lives up to their story. And with David, that's a challenge because his story is so remarkable. I certainly felt sadness for all the reasons that we've discussed, and I felt sad that my friend has gone through what he's gone through, particularly with Shay. I felt inspired by the fact that David has overcome so much to be sitting here right now, and also by Anita, because as David has said many times, he probably wouldn't be alive today if not for her. And concerned, yes, of course, for all the reasons we just discussed a moment ago. So all those words fit in different ways.
David, let's end this with a little bit of levity here. The show itself, John mentioned, hopefully it coming back. Do you feel like that's plausible, that Feherty in the form that we knew it could return again? Because I know how much joy it gave you.
Yeah, it was a wonderful 10 years of my life. And I hope, I don't think it'll come back in the same form, but, at LIV, we're talking about, coming up with the show, and we're kicking various ideas around. And next year we hope to have something that'll air, Well,
just don't do that situation comedy that you did before.
No, it won't be that.
Well,
No.
As I hold up the book for the people who are watching, it's well worth it. It's worth it because, as John, you pointed out at the beginning, and it couldn't be more true, the reason why people continue to stand by this man's side is because there's such goodness in him. There is such a selfless quality to you. You've always been exceedingly kind to me, which is not unusual. That's what you are with people. This book is worth the time to learn about a great journey, but a journey that's been fraught with challenges and obviously with profound tragedy. I appreciate both of you, not only for taking the time, but just for being there for me at various times in my life. David, John, thank you both for doing this.
Gary, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks, Gary.
Appreciate John Feinstein and David Feherty joining me again. And yes, this is the book about David's life, and it's the full capturing of not only his young life, but also the best years of his playing career, and of course the transition to broadcasting, the battles with addiction and the disease of alcoholism, depression, and of course the tragic and profound death of his son. All of that captured with total transparency in this book. I highly recommend it. I appreciate them, but most importantly, appreciate everybody out there for listening and watching this edition of the Five Clubs Conversation. We'll see you next week.